Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the MarketHER's ProTalk series. Today, we are discussing leading through empathetic conversation, and we have Bev Hancock here with us today. Bev Hancock is a conversational leadership strategist and interactive global speaker. She has carved out a distinctive niche, unveiling the power of authentic, open dialogue that bridges worlds through conversation. As a South African, she believes that there's a magical and wise truth in the language and practice of Ubuntu. Did I say that correctly, Bev?
You did.
And this word describes our humanity. Translated literally, it means I am because we are. Very beautiful. I love that. Bev uses coaches, leadership, and conversational intelligence skills to catalyze conversational transformation in families, teams, organizations, nations, and the planet. There has never been a time where leaders must communicate with compassion and power. Bev has honed her craft to become a beacon of inspiration and trusted communications coach for countless leaders and aspiring professionals worldwide. Bev, we're so glad to have you. Welcome to the MarketHER platform.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And I feel very honored to be in this conversation, and even more so, the topic that you have given me. I do really recognize that it is such an important topic, particularly for women. And even more so, I think when we start deep diving into intersectionality and start going through the various layers. And I think as I approach my 60th year, I sometimes ask myself the question, what would I have told my younger self?
Mm-hmm.
And it was really only when I hit my 50s that I began to realize that if I had had conversations earlier, my life would have been very different. And I'm really hoping that in this session that we have today, I'm not coming here to lecture as an expert, because I really am not an expert in the people who are on the other side of this call. I'm not an expert in their lived experience. I come from a place where I have had an incredibly privileged upbringing. I haven't had to deal with a lot of the areas that a lot of the different groups who have been disadvantaged in our society have been. So what I'm really hoping to offer in this call, should I say, is I think maybe just a fresh way of looking at things,
Mm-hmm.
and also to ask ourselves, so much of what is happening around bias and racism and gender violence and all of the issues that we're dealing with is outside of our control.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask, what is in our control? And I think this is where I love the conversational leadership space, because it really, when you have a conversation with somebody, it brings it into the room. And you ask yourself the question, what do we have the power to change and influence? And I believe that those micro changes, those micro conversations, one conversation, one relationship at a time, we can build a new system.
Mm-hmm.
And the first topic that you gave me, you really gave me a lot to think about, and I really had to go and do some deep leadership reflection on the topics that you did, was how gender and racial bias create fear in the workplace. So to start off, I'd like to actually zoom out and maybe take a step back, because this is a very, very sensitive and a very personal topic for so many people. They live, this is their lived experience. And I wanted to maybe just propose that as we think about bias, let's actually put it in a wider context. And I think the first thing is to, I think, realize that bias in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Because the brain, if we recognize how the brain is structured, and a lot of the work that we do is in neuroscience, is that the brain particularly likes containers, certainty, and labels. The minute the brain is actually able to label something, it feels comfortable and it can move on. The difficulty, though, is that once people start defining a response or a certain set of rules or a certain set of actions that go hand in hand with that bias, that is where we start seeing a lot of the really, really damaging work that we're experiencing in life and society at the moment. So part of what I want us to achieve, and I see that Noah's joined us as well, unless is that somebody from your team who's joined us?
Yes, Noah is our marketing specialist. Welcome, Noah.
Welcome, Noah. Lovely to have you here. So as we have a look at this, I would really love to leave people with a feeling of an understanding of what is happening in their brain, and then how do we actually use that space to have much more, I think, much more authentic and much more empathetic and compassionate conversations to get to the place that we want to get to. Coming from South Africa, as you can imagine, I do come from a history of a tremendous amount of discrimination. We have had a lot of violence in our past. We have had a lot of terrible things happen. I have seen both in terms of gender violence, racial discrimination. It's not a pretty story. It's not a pretty story at all. But I would like to think that as we emerged into the new democracy in 1999, and particularly under the leadership of Nelson Mandela, that we learned some really critical lessons. And are there any lessons that we can learn there that we could bring into our experience and say, could I be stepping into my power, stepping into my light, more able to control the way that not necessarily that I can't control other people, but I can control how I exist and show up in this space.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the interesting thing is, somebody made a comment the other day, and that is, stereotypes make us feel safe.
Okay.
And this is an interesting concept because we tend to think stereotype equals bad. Stereotype equals bias. Bias equals bad. But if you think about it, there's a known quantity in a stereotype. If I'm with a group of people who share my interests, who share my worldview, who see the world that I do, and we all belong to a certain kind of people, there's a certain level of comfort in that.
Mm-hmm.
What happens, however, and this is perhaps one of the key elements that we have to focus on, is if it was done in a place where everybody was on a level playing field, then stereotypes would simply be birds of a feather flock together.
Mm-hmm.
When you start bringing politics and power into the bias discussion, it changes dramatically. And one of the things that I think concerns me is that I think that even in this bias conversation, we are creating new stereotypes. We are creating a new language. Mm-hmm. And it's not always opening up the space, it's shutting it down. And I would really love to see how we can do that. But to come back to the topic about how gender and racial bias create fear in the workplace.
Yeah.
Let's actually chat about how fear actually shows up in the brain. Mm-hmm. And if we go into the brain, the first thing we realize is that there is a whole unconscious level that we're not always necessarily aware of. And sometimes when we are not deeply self-aware, the fear lurks. Mm-hmm. The fear lurks in the shadows, behind the curtains. And one of the most important things that we need to focus on is an understanding of our own blind spots. Because when we're in the you don't know what you don't know, it's a very murky space. Mm-hmm. And it's a space that will trigger your brain. Because if you look at the fundamental purpose of the human brain is not to love, is not to laugh, is not to learn. The fundamental purpose of the human brain is to protect you. And the minute the brain perceives any kind of threat, it interprets that as fear and it will respond. So just to stay on this blind spots conversation for a while, the whole process of awareness is about uncovering what it is that we don't know. And this is where our peer groups, this is where our birds who are flocking together can either be a great aid in helping us uncover our blind spots or to help reinforce our blind spots. Because we go and we look for somebody who thinks the same way as we do and agrees with us. So this is the first place that we, as particularly women in the workplace, women in the world, the journey actually starts with us. So I would like to invite people to really go into a process, and the best people to tell you where your blind spots are people who know you and observe you every day. And when you open up to really honest but compassionate feedback, you are able to expose those blind spots. And in exposing them, you actually have more personal power.
Yeah.
Natalie, a question, just from you. You work with a great community of women. What are you seeing in that community at the moment?
Yeah, so a few things I've seen. I do see a good amount of women who are working on this journey, of self-awareness, and have, further along on that journey. And they do have more of what I would say a calm. Mm-hmm. And then there are a number of women who are sort of like response place where mm-hmm. you understand that you're in a space where people might be a little afraid. They're mm-hmm. afraid because you are not the same kind of bird in their mm-hmm. eye. That stereotype is not matching up for them. So their fear has kicked in, and you're feeling the effects of that, and you don't really know how to respond to it. In my mind, I see almost the vision of that lion or hyena that spotted its prey, and now the prey knows that it's been spotted, and it's like you're going to fight, flight, or freeze. You're going to do one or the other. And so I see a lot of the fight, in the sense that we need jobs, we're building careers. We want to succeed. So we are wanting to fight at times, but at other times you can't even take it. Women are leaving the corporate space in droves, right? Mm-hmm. So one thing that I've seen is women not necessarily all being able to, or having the language to help each other see all of those blind spots, or not even having the mindset of seeking that feedback. Right? So I see a disconnect there, where I think that some of us are finding it is in spaces that are prepared for that, which could be your therapist. Mm-hmm. It could be your affirmations app, your cognitive therapy app, a women's circle like MarketHER, mm-hmm. where we come together and sort of, when women come to the MarketHER circle, they're looking for that. They're yes. thinking, other women here, especially other women marketers, they mm-hmm. know this industry, they know this space, they're going through some of the same things I'm going through. I wonder how they dealt with it. Mm-hmm. And they show up in that space ready to listen. Mm-hmm. So, that's why MarketHER exists. And you're absolutely right. Absolutely agree.
That's wonderful. And that's sisterhood. I mean, I think sisterhood is just such a powerful thing, because as we step into the workplace, I think that this is where a lot of the fear shows up, and where we lose a lot of our agency and a lot of our control, because we are stepping in to the halls of power. And I think to start off with, I'd really love to just chat about what's happening in the brain space, because as we connect with this, I mean, you talked about the fight or flight response. Mm-hmm. You also, distrust and trust actually sit in different parts of the brain. Yeah. So if you have a look at the brain, you've got three essential brain categories. All right, which the brain's obviously a lot more complex than that. But for the purpose of this, you have the thinking brain, which is your executive brain over here. You have in the middle, you have the emotional brain. And at the base of your skull, in the brainstem, you have the instinctive brain. People might have heard of the amygdala, the reptilian brain, it's sometimes called, which is the very reactive part. And that is where the fight or flight sits. Mm-hmm. So when fear enters the room, what actually happens is cortisol floods through your system. Now, cortisol is there to put you on that hyper alert. You know, as a mom, when your kid starts running into the traffic and you don't think, you just react. You go out there, you grab them, you pull them back, and only afterwards do you realize that you could have been hit by a 10-ton truck.
Yeah.
And that is the role of cortisol. But it also, in a conversation, in an environment where people are under stress, where they feel under threat, this is the chemical that is flooding their brain.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that really stood out for me is that cortisol, in fact, let me ask you if you can give me a guess here. How long do you think cortisol stays in the system?
My guess would be about 24 hours.
It's pretty close, 26 hours. Okay, so that stressful incident or that harsh conversation or that place where you felt unsafe, might have happened at 7 o'clock one morning. It hasn't left you by lunchtime. The cortisol is still pumping through your system. And the role of cortisol is to shut down the thinking brain so that you can react and do what you need to do. Distrust is an instinctive thing. People can feel it. They can, as you spoke about the prey of the cheetah. All right, that whether it's a rabbit or a buck, they feel it, and their whole instinct goes into this place of distrust, and they know that they're under threat. So if you have a look at the bottom right of the head, this is what's happening when we get into a situation where we feel under threat. To counteract this, we have to open up the brain. And to do that, and this is the one place where I really believe that women have the advantage, is that we have to come up with an antidote. And that antidote, in your positive chemicals, you get serotonin, which is what you get when you go running or you go jogging or walking and you go into the gym and you're feeling really great and really healthy. You have dopamine, which you've got to be careful of because it's the natural version of cocaine. All right, that's where you've been playing Candy Crush and you can't stop. All right, that's dopamine. Okay, and then oxytocin is I call it the love drug. It's what you feel when you have a child and you bond with your child. It's what you feel when you fall in love. It's what you feel when you express gratitude or your sisterhood comes and embraces you. A hug is one of the best ways to transmit oxytocin. But you need a lot more oxytocin in your system because it doesn't have the same shelf life as cortisol does. So there's something I call the 5-to-1 rule. And this is one tool that has really stood me in good stead. For every negative occurrence or negative conversation or negative experience that you have, you need 5 positive inputs to balance that out. So if you are feeling under pressure, because when I speak to women, particularly who are in socially disadvantaged categories, be it women, particularly Black women, especially so, neurodivergent women who are then, and some are dealing with all three, which is just exponential. And the layers get deeper and deeper and deeper. They are exhausted. They're absolutely exhausted because it never lets up. You're always like that prey, having the cheetah chasing you. So the trick here is to start building up that oxytocin. And I want to give you a physical tool to work with. If you do this with your hand, this is kind of what the brain looks like. Remember that when you're under stress, it hits you here. It shuts down. Okay, I'm not quite sure why that happened. Hold on a sec. It shuts down the thinking brain. It affects the emotional soft center, which goes into retreat, and you go into that fight or flight. And when you are in a place of anger, sorry, my computer's got a life of its own today. When you go into a place of anger, just have a look at those facial expressions.
Yeah.
On the left-hand side, we have a cortisol conversation. On the right-hand side, we have an oxytocin conversation. And we tend to think that the cortisol conversations are the tough conversations, and the oxytocin conversations is when we're all being very loving and we're not saying anything negative and we're never dealing with deep issues. We kind of brushing them under the table. the key, the real challenge here is, can we have those real, very necessary system-altering conversations in an oxytocin space?
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge of
That's
where, yeah, it really is. And I think in our preparation for the setting, we were talking about hair, which has been, it is such an issue. And you know, as I was looking at this, I went right back to the spiritual roots of Samson. Hair has been an issue for a very, 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 very long time. And it keeps kind of popping up. And I know that at the moment it is a massive conversation, particularly for women of color. However, I want to take us back to where maybe the root of a lot of this has started for us in business. And that's back in the 1950s. So if you go and get a picture of the Beatles in the 1960s, and my apologies to your young membership who are not quite sure who the Beatles are, they were a very, very, very famous pop group once upon a time back in the day, as my son would say. And you have a look at their hair. It's all very neat, short and cut, and dressed in suits and looking terribly smart. And that is what a good-mannered, well-brought-up young man used to look like. The corporate rules haven't changed. Our dress codes are still based in the 1950s. How we do up our hair at school and at work is still based in that you've got to have this lovely lock of hair that's not too messy, doesn't get in the way, not too frizzy, don't do this with it, don't do that with it. And it's actually embedded in these processes we have in our organization, which is absolute madness.
Yeah.
And I think that part of where we're going wrong with this conversation is that for women who are having to deal with this on a daily basis, where people are coming to you and looking at you and saying, I don't think you're a professional. I don't think you're a professional. I don't think you're a professional. You are on the defensive all the time to be able to say, well, actually, this is natural hair, or this is actually a beautiful style. You shouldn't have to be having those conversations. And I think this is the thing. And I think Mary Barra from General Motors really summed it up. If we're going to change the system, you can't have a group of people who are practicing allyship, who are saying the right things, underpinned by a process, a formal business process that is undermining those conversations. So when she came in, when she first took over, she brought in a document this thick, and she said to the team, she said, this is the dress code for the company. And she tore it up and she threw it over her shoulder. She said, why don't we just have a dress code that says dress appropriately?
Yeah.
And as adult, mature women in our space, and as marketers, you will know this very powerfully. You need to show up for your stakeholders in a way that is going to make them easy to work with.
Yes.
So it comes down to two levels. Both, how do you feel comfortable? You are at your most powerful when you are at one with yourself. I went on Google to look at, I pulled out some of these pictures. This was a picture of, it was taken, just a caveat, it was taken a few years ago because there was quite a big controversy around this picture. All right, because this was what unprofessional hair looked like in a Google search in 2016. All right, and as you can see, a lot of the unprofessional hair is black. All right, black woman. And as I had a look at this, I started asking myself the language. We use the word professional, all right? What does that actually mean? If you go and Google unprofessional hairs now, they'll tell you not to wear pigtails. Don't wear it in a bun. Don't put it like this. Don't put it like that. How does that impact on your ability to do your job as a professional?
Right.
And there's the conversation that needs to change. And it has to be, that conversation has to happen at a systemic level. It has to happen at a culture level within the organization. And even more importantly, this conversation has to happen in the boardroom.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and now we have the Crown Act, which makes it illegal to approach, especially women of color or any women about their hair in this way, crown act. So it's, Dove has been a pillar in speaking up on this topic. But as you look at most of the hair on the screen here, it's neat, it's clean. It should not, most of it would not, I would definitely not say that about the pink necessarily, but if it gets too loud, then yes, it draws a lot of attention to you, and that's attention away from the subject matter at hand in whatever meeting room, right? So that's distracting. It can be distracting. But if the hair is neat and clean, then all you're really saying to that person, if you're saying you're unprofessional because of your hair, you're saying, you're not the same bird as me. You're not the same bird as me, and that bothers me.
Very much so. And, I mean, as I look at these women, I'm drawn to, I know the tattoo thing is a completely different discussion, and we could probably spend another hour on that, so we won't do that. But I think it's about relanguaging, and there are two words that I believe, just to end off this section of this discussion. There are two words that really concern me, because they both need to be unpacked and probably even eliminated when it comes to this to a bias discussion. The one is professional, because it's a suitcase word. It means something different to everybody. And ultimately, as young people are coming into the workplace, they were wanting to show off their individuality. And older leaders can help them to find that balance between individual expression and that professional balance that they feel that I think I like the word that you use, that's not distracting.
Yeah.
But it's that when one decides that balance, it's not my job to come to you and say, I don't think that your hairstyle is professional. As a woman, I would say, how do you feel when you are standing in front of the client? What response are you getting from them? Are they distracted by something you're bringing into the room? If they're not, then the pink hairstyle might work. So I think, it comes down to an individual discussion, and this is something I'm going to come back down to a little bit later. But I think there is nothing I'm loving seeing more is the freedom that Black women particularly, because I see this in South Africa and Africa as well, are just reveling in their natural beauty. I think the last year's Miss Universe, who was from South Africa, she was actually criticized for not doing the big hairstyle and just being herself. Her natural hairstyle was very, very short. And her message was, this is me.
Yeah.
And it was, it was on a global stage, and it was so beautiful. So I think to bring it back into your own power, don't let other people be the narrators of your life. Bring it back into your power. And if you are comfortable in your own shoes and your clients are responding well, then we must get rid of these silly policies and really go down to a dress for the day. Come to work for the work that you need to do today, and come in all of your authenticity. Every woman loves to feel fabulous. So be at your most fabulous so that you can bring your energy to your clients. And don't let anybody else tell you what that should look like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's go on to the next segment, because we could probably talk about this all day. The next question you asked me was around listening to your inner voice. And there's just a couple of very short things that I wanted to maybe give you to work with here. And this comes from the work of Otto Schwarmer, which is the Theory U. He's a professor at MIT. And he came up with 3 levels of listening. He said, first of all, have an open mind. I think as we go into a conversation, so often we've almost already decided what the other person is going to say and mean. So here we get into a very factual conversation. I don't want to go into this too much because it's a whole other subject on its own. He said, then we need to go down to the next level, which is open will. And this is where we start connecting on an emotional basis, on a meaning basis, on a purpose basis. So as you're listening to the words of others, are you really hearing what is important to them? Are you hearing the language they're using, and what is that telling you about their inner space? But it's the third level particularly that I want to highlight, and that is the open will, and that goes within. We have a lot of conversations every single day. Most of those conversations we're actually having with ourselves.
Mhm.
And when you go into a conversation and you start listening, is your mind so busy that the only thing you're doing is processing, coming up with arguments, listening to respond rather than to understand.
Yeah.
So in this first level, and I'll stop after this, I just wanted to show you, this is a lovely tool. This is a really, really lovely tool. At the first level, seek new data, seek new perspectives. Don't always look for people that agree with you. Because very often what you're doing is that you've got a message inside your head, and I'm coming to you, Natalie, and I'm saying, you agree with me, don't you? Okay. And if you don't agree with me, then I'm going to cancel you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So being open to those new perspectives, as we connect with each other's lived experiences and stories, we start seeing things through new eyes. That's why each other's lived experience is the one thing that people cannot take away from us. And then when we bring it down inside, we shift thinking. What are you seeing if you were sitting in a forum or in a women's circle or in a marketing meeting, to what extent are you seeing internal conversations almost bursting into the external space?
In meetings, I would say those internal conversations stay hidden. They stay quiet.
So they stay hidden, and isn't that even more dangerous?
Yes. Yeah, they come out behind doors, and they create division.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then those thoughts turn into red cortisol conversations. Which are incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
The second half of this model, if we look at the left-hand side, are we not seeing so much in our communication, particularly on social media and in societal and politics, the voice of judgment?
Mm-hmm.
We're judging each other. Mm-hmm. You're not like me, so you must be wrong. Mm-hmm. You don't think like I think, so you must be wrong. Yeah. If you don't agree with me, then I don't want anything to do with you. So we sit in this place of judgment. We are judging others, and we are allowing other people to judge us, which is taking up a lot of our headspace time. And it really serves no purpose whatsoever. Mm-hmm. That turns into cynicism. Because now, here they go again. Here they go again. And cynicism, repeated often enough, is going to turn into fear. And that fear sits within. Mm-hmm. The last part that we were going to go in today, and I just wanted to position it for that, was what happens when we reframe. What could we say instead of I don't agree with you, I think that you're unprofessional, to rather kind of say, wow, that's very interesting. How did it go? Mm-hmm. And accept people who they are. Be curious instead of saying my way is right, my way is right. What changed when you stepped into that meeting feeling really authentic and really powerful? How did it affect the energy in the room? What changed? Yeah. And ask those questions. And the internal fear cannot exist in an atmosphere of hope. Mm. So a very, very powerful listening mode. So we have a choice. We are always standing at a fork, and we can take our conversations down a road to failure, which are low trust, cortisol, red conversations. Or we can go the road to success and start building up a different way of doing things. On the road to failure, what we do is that you'll come from a meeting and just say, look, somebody made a really inappropriate comment. Okay, they told me that I was unprofessional, I wasn't dressed properly, and I'm in your circle. All right. And I say to you, oh, no, they're absolutely wrong. They're always wrong. All right. You're fine. You're cool. but there's a little voice in my mind to say, maybe that skirt was a little bit short. Okay. But we don't tell you that.
Right.
Because what we do in our circles is that we reinforce each other's thinking. Would I be a better friend? And it reminds me of a colleague that I worked with who used to wear really, really revealing attire to a client meeting. All right. Mm-hmm. I actually had to sit and say to her, look, we've actually had feedback from the clients that this is not working.
Yeah.
Whereas I could have just gone to her as part of her sisterhood and said, no, and she did look beautiful. Don't get me wrong. She looked gorgeous. She had a beautiful figure. She could really do it. Yeah. But I had to give her that feedback. What we tend to do is we tend to ask people to agree with us. Instead, go and speak. If your sisterhood, your circle, could very gently with that oxytocin say, what would you change? What would be different? Okay, how would it feel if you tried a different hairstyle, or and really giving you a place to explore without criticism, without judgment, just giving your flock a place to really open up the space and embrace different perspectives. How powerful would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. And in our circles, we use the name of it is slipping my mind at the moment, but we use a way, there's a way of communicating when we bring issues to the circle. Mm-hmm. The idea is to, I think it's called assertive inquiry at the moment, but the idea is to help that person work through that struggle, so that they are, as you have on your screen, they're doing the self-reflection themselves. They're thinking about the possibilities. They're owning their stuff instead of the whole group just giving that, false positive affirmations there. And that definitely works a lot better.
It's absolutely great. And that is the path down the road to success. So I'm not going to go through this now, but I thought this next slide now, because I just thought it would be nice to be part of the content for people to work with. Let me see. There we go. Just really looking at some things to work on down the red road as opposed to the green road. Because I think let's move on to perhaps what is the last section, and I'm going to combine the two together because we have actually incorporated quite a bit of it as well, is how do we reframe that fight or flight response and build trust through conversation? And if you have a look at this picture, you'll see that there is a trust down at the bottom. Low trust, you will pick up if you are observing resistance or indifference. That will tell you that you are in a low trust environment. If you are in a high trust environment, you will see, and we use the word disruption here in a very powerful way. It's disruption as related to innovation. There's an openness to create. Or even better, when we really trust each other, that's when we partner. Yeah. So this trust style gives you two tools. First of all, it says, what are you seeing, which is the bottom layer of words. And then how do we respond? And I'm just going to touch on two of those because to really raise the level of trust, I want to introduce you to two animals, because in a low trust environment, we tend to react. Remember when we get the fight, flight, or freeze, this part of our brain shuts down and we will react rather than respond. This quote by Viktor Frankl, where he says we've literally got this tiny space between the stimulus and the response, in which to be able to respond appropriately rather than react. It puts us in a much more powerful position. The best thing that we can do is to either breathe or say something like, that's very interesting, or can I ask you a clarifying question? That allows your brain to settle down and it allows you to be fully present. Once again, I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but I think it's a lovely tool of really practicing presence, and to just reflect on these words as you take them through.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah.
So I think the question is, how do we dial up trust? And there we've got the distrust at the base of the brain, the positive trust over here. But how do we actually switch up the dial? The first thing you will see in distrust, and we're seeing this in a lot of our conversations at the moment, we're dealing with the tiger in the room. You feel as if there is pushback all the time. All right. And you're just not getting there. They're not listening to you. They're not seeing it your way. And I'm seeing this very much in our political realms as well, where we just, at the moment, we just put ourselves in camps and we're just not listening to each other.
Right.
Instead, if we tune into each other, and it takes more than one conversation, we listen, that listening we were talking about earlier, asking questions, not trying to persuade and influence, to say, Natalie, you've got to believe what I believe because I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
Straight away, you're pushing back and you say, but you don't understand my lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the tiger will do two things. The tiger will either roar, in which case it's a loud conversation, all right,
Mm-hmm.
a very aggressive conversation,
Mm-hmm.
or the tiger will go silent.
Mm-hmm.
And the silent tiger is actually more dangerous.
Yeah.
Because that's when they're about to pounce. How do you deal with the tiger? You tune in, you build trust, you connect with them, you listen, you reflect back and you say, so what I'm hearing you saying is, that's an interesting perspective. Tell me more. You're not actually saying, well, you should be believing this, because they're not ready to hear that. They will resist anything that does not meet their narrative. As you start listening to them and making them realize that there might be a little bit of common ground, that there might be a new language that we can use. Maybe we should stop using all of this incendiary language that is very explosive.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use terms that are going to open the space rather than shut the space down. Let's not put in rules that one person can't meet. Let's say, what is the one thing that would work for both of us? So it's a very small shift when you're dealing with a tiger. But as the tiger starts coming to terms with you, they can actually be your greatest allies.
Mm-hmm.
Because resistance is a lot easier to deal with than the second one, and that is apathy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When somebody doesn't care.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the halls of power don't care. Any thoughts from what you've seen so far?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. The indifference is where the war is sort of already lost.
Mm.
But if you have someone that is willing to engage, then you have somewhere to start. And I like the simplicity of how you put that. Just one thing we can agree on.
Yeah.
One thing we can, and not to try to change the whole system, because we were looking at it. We see so much in the news, we hear so much, and we would love to see all of it change and be better. But that's not realistic. So what we're looking to do is just create that ally, that build that trust and create that ally.
Absolutely. And it happens one conversation at a time. And I think this is the message of hope that I want to leave with you. You're right, we can't change the system. But if we have one conversation that shifts the system, and then another conversation that shifts the system, and another one, and then your circle touches my circle, and we come together and we form a wider dialogue, and then our sister circles start coming, and then our brother circles. One of the things that worries me is that we're having gender conversations without men present. I think we need to have some conversations with men, because I've got 2 sons, and if they don't know how to behave with you, then we've got a problem.
Yeah.
What are the conversations we need to have? And what I love about conversations, they sit 100% within our control. If we have the conversation, even in the halls of power, with each other, with people we agree with people that we don't agree with, we build relationships. We learn to understand who they are as a unique individual. How will we can shift a nation by doing this. but it starts with every conversation. And there's a certain sense of relief that we feel, and it's almost a counterbalance to this exhaustion, is to be able to say, professionalism. Let's talk about this policy that we have in terms of whether or not we should wear skirts or trousers. Let's have a conversation about that. Let's get that conversation right. Now let's have another conversation. Let's talk about how we address people of different genders and different races. The last thought that I would love to leave is to say, to me, the real key to systemic change is that we have to shift, we have to reframe from the way that we are dealing with bias and gender and all of these issues as descriptors rather than definers. I so often hear my very well-meaning white colleagues say, I don't see color. There's a beautiful African greeting in Zulu that says Sawubona, and it means I see you. People want to be seen. People want to be seen for everything that they are. So it's not about not seeing color. It's about who you are describes who you are, what you look like, what you sound like, what color your eyes are, whether or not you're married, whether or not you're this. That's a description. The problem is that we have taken those descriptions and we define our behavior and how we treat others based on what those descriptors are. If we could stop defining people by the boxes that we put them in, and rather say, let's enjoy who they are as that box, as a unique individual, as a fully human, unique individual. And let's stop defining people. So our conversations need to start changing to say, oh, women need this in the workplace. Not all women need that in the workplace. Some women need that in the workplace. Some men need that in the workplace. Let's stop putting characteristics and rules and assumptions around these groups that we have created. And let's rather say, let's just appreciate each other for who we are. And then I really believe we will see the deepest systemic change.
Absolutely.
That's about all we got time for.
That is quite fantastic. A great place to stop at, Bev. I absolutely agree with you. If we can connect on more of a personal level rather than these stereotypes and appreciate each other uniquely, individually, what a better place we'd be in.
We certainly would.
Thank you so much, Bev, for joining us today. We deeply appreciate it. I will have in the show notes how people can reach out to you, get in touch with you, and follow you. You're on LinkedIn, so Bev Hancock. They can run a search, and you offer courses as well in communication. So, and we even hope to have you soon offer courses to the MarketHER community. So, thank you so much for your time. We deeply appreciate it.
It's only a pleasure. And I wish you and your group all of the best. And yeah, one conversation at a time.
Wonderful.
Right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Okay, then.
Bye. Bye.